Gather close, my friends, and let your mind wander into the deepest, darkest corners of your imagination. Tonight, I bring you a tale of whispers in the night, footsteps in the dark, and a figure that exists between reality and nightmare. This is the story of the Ayuwoki. Keep the lights on if you must, but remember, it doesn't always protect you. Allyson Rivera wasn't easily frightened. She'd seen enough horror movies, ghost hunting TV shows, and creepy TikTok videos to consider herself more skeptic than believer. Yet there was one thing she couldn't shake: a strange, persistent rumor spreading online. Something about a creature named Ayuwoki, a name that made her snort at first. People swore it was real. They claimed the creature looked like a distorted version of Michael Jackson, mimicking his appearance in an unsettling, twisted way. Allyson laughed it off as another viral meme, until she experienced it herself. It all started with a simple joke at a late-night gathering. It was a Friday night in Los Angeles, and Allyson and her two best friends, Marcus and Jenna, were hanging out at her apartment. The city's warm air carried the hum of traffic outside her window as they passed around a bowl of popcorn, half watching an old horror movie on Netflix. Jenna, ever the chatterbox, had her phone out, scrolling through a series of creepy Reddit threads. "Okay, you guys have to hear this one," Jenna said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "There's this thing going around called the Ayuwoki." Allyson rolled her eyes, though she leaned in, intrigued despite herself. Marcus sat up on the couch, interested in whatever ridiculous horror Jenna had uncovered. "What's the Ayuwoki?" Marcus asked, his tone dismissive but curious. "It's this urban legend that's blowing up online," Jenna explained. "Apparently, it's this creature that looks like a messed up version of Michael Jackson. The idea is that if you're alone at night and hear Hee-Hee, like Michael's signature sound, you know it's coming for you." Allyson chuckled. "Oh God, that sounds so stupid. Who even comes up with this stuff? I don't know, but some people swear they've seen it. They say it doesn't matter if you believe or not. Once you hear that Hee-Hee, you're already marked." Marcus grinned, nudging Allyson. "You scared yet?" Allyson laughed and threw a piece of popcorn at him. "Please, give me a break." They carried on with their night, the conversation drifting away from Ayuwoki and back to the horror movie they were barely watching. It wasn't until much later, after Jenna and Marcus had left, that Allyson would start to regret brushing it off so easily. The clock read 2:47 a.m. when Allyson woke up to an eerie silence. The city's usual noise, cars honking, the hum of distant traffic, had faded, leaving only an oppressive quiet. She blinked, her room bathed in soft moonlight. Something felt wrong. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, checking for messages or missed calls, but there was nothing. Just a sense of unease she couldn't shake. Then she heard it. At first it was faint, like the whisper of the wind, but then it became clearer. A soft, breathy voice echoed through her apartment. "Hee-Hee." Allyson froze. Her pulse quickened, heart thudding in her chest. She held her breath, listening, praying it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. "Hee-Hee." It came again, closer this time. The sound sent a chill down her spine. She sat up in bed, clutching the blankets as if they could protect her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. "Okay," she whispered to herself, forcing a laugh. "It's nothing. Probably a stupid prank from Marcus or Jenna." She tried to shake off the fear, but the sound lingered in the back of her mind. Her apartment felt different now, colder, darker, more menacing. She glanced at the clock again. 3 a.m. Exactly. Allyson's phone vibrated in her hand, making her jump. She looked down to see a message from an unknown number. The text was simple, chilling. "Do you hear it?" Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who the hell was sending her this? Before she could respond, another message came through. "Hee-Hee." She dropped the phone, backing away from it as if it had burned her. This wasn't funny anymore. This was real. For a moment, everything was silent again, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Then she heard it. A soft creak, the sound of her front door opening. Allison's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard anyone knock. She hadn't even heard footsteps. But now the door was open, and she wasn't alone. Fear gripped her as she got out of bed, tiptoeing toward the hallway. Her apartment was small, just a living room, kitchen, and bedroom, but in that moment, it felt like a labyrinth. Every shadow seemed to pulse with malice. She peered down the hallway, her breath shaky. The front door was wide open, a gust of cold air seeping in from the outside. And then she saw it, standing just inside the doorway, bathed in the faint glow of a streetlight. A figure, tall, slender, with a distorted, pale face that resembled a nightmarish version of Michael Jackson. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, wide and unblinking, and its lips stretched into an unnatural smile. It tilted its head, staring directly at her. Then, softly, mockingly, "Hee-Hee." Allison's blood ran cold. It was real. The Ayuwoki was real. Without thinking, she slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it with trembling hands. She stumbled back, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. She grabbed her phone from the floor and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The screen glitched, the signal dropping in and out. She could only hear static on the other end. Then, through the static, she heard that familiar sound again. Hee-Hee. It was inside. For hours, Allison remained in her room, listening to the faint sounds of the creature moving through her apartment. It didn't rush. It didn't pound on her door or scream at her. It just moved, slowly, methodically. She heard it drag its feet across the floor, the soft creak of her furniture as it passed by. Occasionally, she'd hear that horrible sound, hee-hee. By morning, the noise stopped, and the apartment fell into a strange, oppressive silence once again. But Allison knew it wasn't over. She knew it would come back. She barely left her bedroom, only venturing out during daylight to grab food or use the bathroom. Nights were spent huddled under her blankets, wide-eyed and sleepless. Every creak, every gust of wind outside her window made her jump, her nerves fraying with each passing hour. Days turned into a blur of paranoia and fear. She stopped going to work, ignored calls from Jenna and Marcus, and avoided social media entirely. She couldn't tell anyone what had happened. They wouldn't believe her. Hell, she barely believed it herself. But every night, without fail, it returned. He. It would call out to her from the hallway, scratch at her door, and she would sit there trembling, waiting for the nightmare to end. After nearly a week of torment, Allison finally broke. She couldn't live like this anymore. The Ayuwoki was driving her mad. Desperate, she reached out to the only person who might understand. A friend of a friend, someone Jenna had mentioned once, a paranormal investigator named Eric, who specialized in urban legends. She contacted him that same day, explaining everything in a frantic, disjointed message. To her relief, he didn't mock her or dismiss her story. Instead, he agreed to meet her that night. Eric arrived at her apartment just after sunset, a backpack full of equipment slung over his shoulder. He was calm, professional, and most importantly, he believed her. "I've heard about this thing before," Eric said, setting up a few devices around her apartment. "It's one of those internet legends that seems to have taken on a life of its own. People think it's just a meme. When we last left Allison, her nights had become a waking nightmare, haunted by the Ayuwoki. But now, with the help of a paranormal investigator named Eric, she hoped to find a way out of her terror. Yet as with many nightmares, the worst is often yet to come." Eric adjusted a small camera in the corner of Allison's living room while explaining his theory. He believed that some urban legends were not just figments of collective imagination, but entities fueled by belief itself. The Ayuwoki, he explained, could have started as a meme, but with so many people fearing and talking about it, it might have manifested into something real. "You're not crazy," Eric reassured her. "But this thing is feeding off your fear. It's getting stronger the more you believe it's coming for you." Allison tried to calm her frayed nerves, but the sound of those two words, "Hee-Hee," echoed in her mind. "How do we stop it?" she asked. "We have to sever its connection to you," Eric said, pulling out a small black book from his backpack. "We'll perform a banishment ritual. It's risky, but I've done similar things before with entities like this. You have to trust me." Eric lit candles and placed them in a circle around the room, instructing Allyson to sit in the center. She held her breath as he muttered an incantation in a language she didn't recognize, his voice low and steady. The air in the room seemed to thicken, growing colder as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. Then suddenly, a gust of icy wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The lights flickered, and the soft hum of the city outside vanished, replaced by an eerie, otherworldly silence. Allyson's heart raced as she looked to Eric for reassurance, but his face had gone pale. "Stay calm," Eric whispered, his voice wavering. "It's trying to fight back." A shadow moved across the room, slithering along the walls like liquid darkness. Then, from the corner of the room, a faint, mocking sound echoed, "Hee-Hee." Allyson's blood ran cold. The Ayuwoki was here. Before Allyson could react, the Ayuwoki emerged from the shadows, its grotesque, distorted face illuminated by the flickering light. Its wide, glassy eyes locked onto hers, and that smile, so unnatural, so wrong, seemed to stretch further, splitting its face in a horrifying grimace. It moved toward them slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring their terror. Eric scrambled to finish the ritual, but the creature's presence was overwhelming. The air grew thick with dread, and Allyson felt a crushing weight on her chest, as though her very soul was being squeezed by an unseen hand. "Hee-Hee." The sound was louder now, echoing in her skull. Allyson clutched her head, trying to drown out the noise, but it was relentless, growing sharper, more insistent. She could feel the Ayuwoki's gaze piercing her, its twisted form looming closer. Eric's voice faltered, and for the first time, Allyson saw fear in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. This thing was stronger than they had anticipated. "Allyson!" Eric shouted. "You have to face it. The ritual's not enough. You have to reject it. Deny its power over you." But how could she? The Ayuwoki was real. It was right in front of her, inches away now, its breath cold on her skin. It reached out with long, skeletal fingers, and Allyson felt the darkness closing in around her. "Hee-Hee." The sound echoed one last time, and suddenly something snapped inside her. She couldn't live in fear anymore. She couldn't let this thing control her. Summoning every ounce of courage, Allyson stood up, her legs shaking but firm. "You're not real!" she screamed, her voice hoarse but determined. "You're not real, and I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, everything froze. The Ayuwoki paused, its grotesque smile faltering as if her words had struck something deep within it. The air shifted and the oppressive weight lifted just slightly. Eric, sensing the change, resumed his chanting, louder this time, more confident. The candles flickered back to life, their flames dancing wildly as the creature recoiled. Allyson stared directly into the Ayuwoki's hollow eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. "You're nothing," she whispered. "You're just a nightmare." With a final guttural scream, the Ayuwoki lashed out, but its form began to waver, distorting and fading as if it were being pulled apart by some unseen force. The air crackled with energy, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the Ayuwoki was gone. Allyson collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. The room was still again, the candles flickering softly in the dim light. Eric knelt beside her, his face pale but relieved. "It's over," he said, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. "At least for now." Allyson nodded, though the weight of what had just happened lingered. The apartment felt different, lighter, safer, but a part of her knew that the Ayuwoki, or something like it, would always be lurking in the shadows, waiting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Eric packed up his equipment, giving her one final piece of advice before he left. "Don't let the fear back in. Once it knows you're afraid, it can come back. You're stronger than it. Remember that." As the door clicked shut behind him, Allyson sat in the quiet of her apartment, the faint sounds of the city returning to normal outside. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. But in the silence, Just as she was about to drift into sleep, she heard it. Soft, faint, barely a whisper. Hee-Hee. Her eyes snapped open, and the room felt cold once again. And so, my friends, we leave Allyson's tale with a lingering question. Is the Ayuwoki truly gone? Or is it just waiting for the right moment to return? Sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones we see, but the ones we fear in the dark. And as long as we believe in them, they'll always be just a breath away. I am the Tales Keeper, the enigma of horror stories. Stay tuned for more Creepypasta. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do so. Click that button or else the Ayuwoki will get you. Hee-Hee. Until next time, keep your doors locked and your fears in check. Because in the world of nightmares, there's always something waiting to giggle in the dark.